Welcome to the Performance Enhancing Podcast. It's like steroids for your brain. A podcast for people looking to live life at their peak potential. Chock full of real-world tools and knowledge that you can apply in your life today. By providing you with a lens into the lives, beliefs, practices, and actions of those who are already living extraordinary lives, the Performance Enhancing Podcast will help you shift your mindset or create that change in your daily rituals and habits so you can explode with success in the areas of life that are most important to you. So get ready for another dose of Performance Enhancing Podcast with SatoriPrime. Here's your host, Ilan Ferdman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another installment of the Performance Enhancing Podcast with your host, Ilan Ferdman. And I'm about to share with you something that is very raw, very real, and was just completed. I'm actually inserting this in the midst of a whole other back slew of interviews that we have. But I just came back from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and gave a talk at the Lamp Post group. And I thought, you know why not just share this talk with you? The talk is titled Fear as Your Guide. In other words, how to use fear as your guide. Now, the talk in total was about 15 minutes or so. So what I've done is I thought at first to give you guys a really long interview or podcast. And then I thought, you know what, I'll just find a place in the middle where I'll break it up. You're going to hate where it stops and where the cliffhanger is. But nonetheless, I wanted to still keep it, in our 25, 30 minute content piece. So this is something that I've put together here over probably the last 3-4 months. As far as a keynote, I've been working on it really, really hard. And I'd love to get your feedback and see what you got out of it. At the end of part 2, we do a ridiculous exercise, which if you want to see, you'll only be able to see it on YouTube. But it was pretty wild. So with that, I'm not going to give you any more. Let's just dive right in. You'll hear me do an intro in the beginning and then actually go into it. If you want to see the video of it, again, you can check this out on YouTube as well, where you can see the whole thing happen live. All right, I hope you really enjoy, and I'd love to get your honest feedback and constructive criticism, because I'm looking on ways to really improve this concept and be able to share with as many people as possible. Hope you enjoy. Like Ted said, I actually started, let's make sure I do this the right way. Yeah, I started SatoriPrime. That's my brother. He's the other half of SatoriPrime. And what we do, in essence, we do a few things. One, we run a digital media agency. So we've been lucky enough to help some of the most amazing people online grow and scale their businesses. But my true passion is actually training and mentoring entrepreneurs. So working with people who are trying to transition out of maybe jobs that they hate and things that they don't like, and uncovering what their gifts are, what their passions are in life, and then showing them how they can cash in on those passions. So that's really one of my favorite things. What I realized is, kind of looking back, I was trying to feel like, what can I tell you about my life history, just real quick. I always was a little bit of a rebel, always did things not the normal way. I had a huge issue with authority, which I'm sure probably every single one of you has something like that here. And so while all my friends were getting jobs at, waitering or whatever, camps or something, I was like, okay, how is someone going to give me a commission-based job? So if I work my butt off, I make a ton of money. And so all these jobs, I had some really weird odd and ends jobs. And the one that I wanted to mention is I actually used to sell speakers out of a white van. So, yeah, this is crazy. So I would drive down the street, and no joke, no sign on the van or anything, just yell out the windows, like, hey man, you like speakers? You want to buy speakers? And I did this for an entire summer. It was one of the best sales jobs I've ever had in my entire life. I actually made $23,000 that summer in 2 months as a 19-year-old. While all my friends were, like, what are you making a summer? Like $1,500, $2,000. And I learned 2 really important things. One, I learned that hearing no means nothing, which is a really important lesson for sales. Rejection came often in that line of business. The other thing I learned was, if you work your ass off, you get rewarded. And so I actually rewarded myself with a trip to Spain that year and paid for it by myself, which is amazing. I was like, hey, Mom, Dad, I'm sending myself to Spain. You don't have to pay for it. So that's kind of where I started. I ended up being in commercial finance for about 8 years. I took a company with a $500,000 investment. I started as a loan officer. 14, 15 months later, they made me a partner, and we grew that company from $500,000 to just over $100 million in assets under management in about like 6 years or so, which is pretty amazing. Collapse happened. I got thrown on my ass, invested everything back into this company to try to keep it afloat, lost everything, heartbroken. But what I also realized, and you guys probably know this, like your life's greatest tragedies end up becoming your greatest blessings. So as I was crying and closing my office down, my brother and I ended up partnering and building this. And so now I get to do what I love more than anything, which is train and mentor people to live the best lives that they possibly have. So that's more than what you need to know about me. You'll learn a lot more. I'm going to share some crazy stories with you as we go through this. The only other thing you'll probably need to know is I'm Israeli, so the only way I operate is raw and super blunt. So if I say something that rubs you the wrong way, just let it go. I didn't mean it. All right, so with that, here's what I'm here to do today. I thought, look, we can talk about marketing, we can talk about sales, but we can do that later. I think what makes the biggest difference for people is what happens in between their ears. I think your mindset will dictate more than 90% of how successful you are in life. And what I want to share with you today is a process that, through some crazy circumstance, which I'll share with you, I got a glimpse at, and then over the past 5 years, my brother and I have actually worked on honing it and being able to share with others so that they can use this in their own lives. We usually do this together, so I'm hoping I can do a good solo. But here's what you want to know. Right now, the only thing I want you to do is just think of an area in your life that's not at a 10. And it can be an area, it can be a specific circumstance, it can be something that you've worked on, that you've struggled with. We're not going to share it, you don't have to write it down, so it can be like super personal and intimate. Just have something in your mind that you would love to have a massive shift in at the end of the day. Okay? All right, and here's the intention for today's talk, is I want to alter your relationship to fear forever. That sounds kind of crazy, but that's what I'm intending to do here. And at the end, well, let me back up here. At the end, I'll let you know we're going to do a pretty intense exercise to put this all together. So we're really going to test how far we've come with this whole fear conversation, okay? So here's one of my favorite quotes by one of my favorite authors. I should probably turn here to read it. If you guys don't know him, Robin Sharma, the monk who sold his Ferrari and the Saint that served for the CEO, great author. So he wrote, "Run towards your fears, embrace them. On the other side of your greatest fears lives your greatest life." And when I read that the first time, I don't think I quite understand it, but life has a funny way of sending things your way to make you understand certain things. So I have a feeling that we have fear all wrong. I actually think that people have been trained, and this is just human, we'll talk about the science behind it, people are trained to run away from fears. People are trained to avoid their fears. In fact, we create lives to make sure that we avoid certain circumstances so that we don't have to confront this fear. And here's what I do know as fact. No matter how many books you read on the topic, no matter how many seminars you go to or how many gurus you're going to work with, fear will always be a part of a human being's life. You cannot remove fear from the equation. So if you're breathing, which you all are, fear will be a part of your adventure. So the question is, I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, what a downer way to start a conversation. Like, they came here, they're eating lunch, they're like, I thought you were going to pep us up. And I'm like, fear will always be there for you. But here's what I want us to kind of be in an inquiry about today. What if we have fear all wrong? What if fear is actually our greatest asset? This is for you, Ted. What if you use fear as your lamppost? I usually say guiding light, but I figured, hey, I can throw in a pun here. There's every single person in this room right now is here. Well, we could do a little quick thing. How many of you have had to overcome some really huge fears to be here today? In your business, in anything, right? As entrepreneurs, it's like a path we take. We have to undo so many things in order to get here. And I think every single one of you, if I ask, could share some incredible moment. I actually spoke to Travis about this. Can share some incredible moments of how you had to overcome something to be here. We just have this thing that we have to go through, like we get confronted with a circumstance, and then everything inside of you will just shake. It'll say, like, get the fuck out of here. Like, this is so scary. Don't do this. Please, let's go over there where it's safe. But there are moments in life where you chose to stand there. You chose to fight for something because there's something bigger than that. And how many of you on the other side of that remember how you felt? Like when you overcame something that you thought was impossible, or you overcame something that you were so terrified to do. How'd you feel? Got it. Great. And like relieved, right? Like almost like a weight gets taken off. Somehow life becomes, like the situation, there's new clarity in the situation. You feel powerful, you feel alive. So Johann von Goethe, who's an old, I wanted to say physicist, and I was like, damn, that's really wrong. He wrote, boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. And I personally believe that when we go through that moment, you have to be bold. The other thing you have to be is courageous. So when we were thinking of those things, right? So courage, I think people have it mixed up. Courage is not the absence of fear, right? Because we know now that biologically everyone has fear. You can't remove fear. But courage is being able to act when you're confronted by fear. And on the other side of that, right, we were talking, like people said, it feel great, relieved, amazing. So whether you're skydiving, how many of you guys have ever skydived? Okay. Do you remember the feeling? Like you might be the bravest person going up in that plane. You're like looking out, you're like, oh, it's so beautiful, and you're trying to convince yourself that you're not scared shitless. And then you've got this person, man or woman, tied to the back of your neck, and once they tell you, like, oh, get your feet out of the plane, your brain goes nutso. It's like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And then they're like, 1, 2, 3, and you're out, right? So whether you've done something like that, you've experienced this. Travis, I know you went to your parents and asked them to sell your life insurance. Told them to sell his life insurance so he can make money, so he can get money back to start a business. Like that's not an easy conversation to go and have with your parents. How old are you? 24, right? Like there was a lot of stuff that was going on before you probably walked in and had that conversation. I remember having to tell my parents that I wasn't going to go to law school after like applying and taking the LSATs and all that stuff. And I walked in that room, I was like, wow, this is going to be the worst thing ever. Telling Russian Jewish parents that their dream of immigrating to this country and their son being an attorney, it's like, yeah, mom and dad, thanks for all the money, but I'm not really going to be an attorney. I remember how terrifying that was. But the point is, when we go through this, we feel incredible. You know, you just feel light, happy, unstoppable. It's almost like, I remember when I jumped out of the plane and I landed, I was like, I can go freaking run a marathon, and I don't even run. So, how many of you know what flow state is? Have you ever heard that term, flow state? Okay, so for those that don't know what flow is being in the zone, it's being so immersed and focused that you perform at your absolute best. And people that have been in flow have described spontaneous joy or rapture, because you're so immersed in something, everything else disappears, right? So I know a lot of you guys here rock climb, or like rock climbing is a big thing here, right? So extreme athletes, we all know who they are? Yeah? Are you an extreme athlete? What do you do? What do you do? Yeah? Okay. So you probably, like at the end of these, you probably feel all that kind of stuff too. He probably wasn't joining you on the race though. So extreme athletes, whether there's guys that rock climb without rope, there are snowboarders that will huck themselves off the side of mountains. This happens, you can barely see him, but that right there is Danny Way. That right there is the Great Wall of China. That man decided to jump the Great Wall of China. Now, a lot of people think that these extreme athletes are adrenaline junkies, and they're completely wrong. These guys are actually what people call now flow junkies. And in fact, they're flow hackers. These guys have figured out, and you could probably attest to this, how to tap into that flow state on demand. And so what I want to show you here today is how to use fear to tap into flow state on demand. Cool? That's what we're going to be looking at today. All right. So the intention is that any area of your life that you want to have a transformation in, any area of your life that you want a massive shift in, if I can show you how to use fear as the guide to get there, to get into flow and have that massive shift, that'd be pretty cool. So if you want this life, like if you want to feel that consistently in your life, what I assert, and by the way, guys, just a caveat before we go on, I'm not saying that any of this is true, right? Like imagine there's a big light behind me, like not truth. But here's what I do know is that perspective makes the biggest difference. So what I'm sharing with you today is just a perspective. If I say something and it like rubs you the wrong way or you don't like it, just throw it out, right? But for today, if you just in this conversation try some stuff on, I promise that what you'll see is you'll see different ways to look at certain situations that can actually have you have these massive shifts. So in order to have this kind of life, what you need to physically do is create circumstances in your life that have you face fears, that have you go and instead of run away from them, actually face towards them, run at them, and annihilate them. So one of the things I learned early on is that successful people trust their gut. We were actually talking about this the other day. And what I mean by that is trust this innate intuition part of you that pulls you. Like, I don't know where yours is in your body or like how you feel it, but I can tell you that before I do anything that's been really monumentally amazing in my life, like even before I go speak at places like this, it's always the same feeling. I have this like tightness in my top of the stomach, and I just know that that's exactly what I need to be doing. Whereas before it was terrifying, now I'm like, this is exactly what I need to be doing. So what happens to most people is you'll get inspired. You'll hear something, you're like, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. I want to go do that. And then seconds later, what actually happens is the brain steps in. And when the brain steps in, all sorts of weird, crazy justifications, like it's scary, what if I fail? What if they find out about me? What if they won't trust me? And one of the ones that really screws people up, it's like, what if I do this and they won't love me anymore? How many of you guys are in marketing here? Okay, so you guys will know this concept really well. The concept of people will buy something based on emotion, right? Like they follow their instincts, they buy something, and then they'll justify that purchase with their brain. So, amazing car here, by the way. So if someone buys this car, like they have a midlife crisis, and they're like, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to buy this car. And then they go to their friends like, you know, this thing gets really good gas mileage. And you're like, yeah, really? That's why you bought this thing? So it's the same kind of concept where we need to start trusting this innate compass. It's like this built-in thing. And again, you might feel yours differently, but if you can learn to start listening to this, it will actually lead you to your greatest life. And the truth is, moment by moment, what you have a choice in is who wins? Who wins that battle? Is it brain and justifications or your innate compass? And just trust that. And there's something to be said about trusting and jumping off that proverbial cliff and just kind of figuring how to fly on the way down, which I think for all entrepreneurs, it's just something we weirdly love to do, I think. So I want to share with you a really, really personal story that will explain how I actually developed this or understood this for for the first time in my life. So on November 16th, 2008, I married that woman who's actually sitting right there right now. Her name is Fanny. And how many of you are married? Whoa. Wow, that's amazing. Very different than a San Diego crowd. Like, how many people are? Oh, no one's married. We don't get married here. So, question for those that are married. Would you agree that there's a massive difference between marriage and partnership? Right? So, this is basically a story about how I learned about partnership for the first time. Unfortunately for me, it took over 2 years to actually create partnership with my wife after we had already been married. So, like I told you before, I lost my company, which was called Metro Funding, at the end of 2010, and I was devastated. I went on a search to try to figure out what the heck am I going to do next. So one thing led to another. I started some weird odd and end things. I ended up connecting with my brother, and during that time, I was making no money. So I'd burned through a huge part of my savings, try to save my previous company. And so at this point, very depleted savings, and I'm on unemployment checks. So that's what we're living on. And I had to make a choice that I hope no human being ever has to make. And the choice was put food on our table or pay our mortgage. Which for anyone that's a man, our job is protectors, right? We're the caregivers. We're the ones that keep our family safe. And I think today, money has kind of become that thing, right? We're not going out and hunting boar to feed our family or keep them safe. So money is that factor. So for me at that moment, that was one of the lowest moments in my life, like when I had to choose between that. Now, I made a lot of mistakes in that time frame. But the biggest mistake I made was I chose to put food on our table and not pay our mortgage, but I didn't tell my wife about this choice, this massive life-altering choice. And the reason was because, well, not the reason, the justification was that I just needed some more time. Like, I could figure out how to get us back on track, and I can do it quickly because I've always done it. Like, I just get shit done. I know how to do that stuff. So I just figured, look, we're going to get this business started. I need a little bit more time, and I'll be able to do this. She won't even have to worry about it. Now, the problem was that lessons always find you. You can run away from them. You can avoid them. At first, they'll be like these little, hints that you can start to see. But eventually, if you're not getting the lesson, the world sends you what I call a gift-wrapped kick in the nuts. And that's what was awaiting for me. So my biggest fear at that moment was, right, so now it's like fast forward a little bit, 5 months after, still can't pay the mortgage. Come on in. Warble in the house. So now 5 months went by. And now I'm really in the shit. Because I know now that I'm not turning this around anytime soon, right? Because starting a business is it takes time. And B, I've been lying to my wife for 5 months. So now, if I told her originally, it would have been okay. But now I've also lied to her for the past 5 months and put us in this horrendous situation. So it was the beginning of December. I want to say it was December 4th. 2011, and I get this gift wrap kick in the nuts. So it's 9:30 p.m. at night. We have a 4-month-old son at this point. His name is Shia. I think I have a picture. Yep, that was him right around that time. And I just put him down to bed, and I'm tiptoeing down the stairs to make sure that he doesn't wake up. And my wife and her grandparents are actually in our kitchen. And I walk down. I'm just elated, stupid grin on my face, because tomorrow morning, we're going as a family to the Bahamas. Now, I can't afford a trip to the Bahamas, and by any stretch of the imagination, I can't even afford our mortgage. But the company that my brother and I were working for at the time actually invited us. It was like an all-paid thing. So her grandparents decided they were going to come. They were going to watch our son, and that's why they were there. So We're talking. All of a sudden, it's like 9:30 something, and the doorbell rings. So I start walking to the front door, and as I go to reach for the handle, that whole thing in my stomach, everything just goes. And I know, I'm like, this is going to be bad, because who the hell is ringing my doorbell at 9:30 p.m. at night? I open the door. This man goes, "Are you Ilan Ferdman?" And stupidly, I say yes. And he goes, "You've been served. Bank of America, your house is officially in foreclosure." So now, I'm standing there, and I feel her and my grandparents standing behind me, burning a hole in my back. Because they have no idea what just happened. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you know, the moment where, like, in milliseconds, all of this stuff just floods you? I'm like, I'm about to get divorced, lose my house, lose my son. I couldn't even turn around. Like, you know the feeling where, like, all the blood just goes into your feet, you're just frozen and paralyzed there in that moment? I know I have to turn around, and all these thoughts are, like, going through my head a million times a minute, and I'm just thinking to myself, what would my son think about his father when he grew up? Complete loser, complete failure. And then, you know, I'm standing there, I'm frozen, and then all these voices in my head just screaming really loud, like, "You idiot, you deserve this, you're a loser, why don't you just go get a stupid job and support your family, like you have to be this stupid entrepreneur and start a business." All of these things. So now I'm sitting there, and fear of, you know, being found out as a liar, letting down my letting down Fanny, letting down my son, all this stuff going through my head. And I finally close the door, I turn around, and I just see confused faces. They have no idea what just happened. And I go and have the most difficult conversation I've ever had to have in my entire life with my wife. And I'm not going to get into all the details of what we spoke about, but you can imagine it was heavy, right? Telling your wife, I think at that point, I hadn't paid the mortgage for almost a year. Almost a year. So in that moment, I had two massive aha moments.
Thank you for joining us on this week's Performance Enhancing Podcast. We've taken this pep talk and created a custom action guide so you know exactly what action steps to take now to grow your business. Just head over to SatoriPrime.com/podcast and download it for free. Also, please leave a comment and rate this podcast on iTunes. It'll help us get the word out. Thanks for listening. Now, go and implement. We'll see you next time.
Did you run through doors till you hit the floor? Did you read my eyes and my aching thoughts? Did you walk through walls till you had to grow? Oh my God, your smile and my soundless call.